Thank you very much. The lunch hour panel is about covering hemp and cannabis in Texas. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'll start over on my right. We have Isaac Yu, who covered cannabis issues for Hearst Papers. That includes the Houston Chronicle, the San Antonio Express News, and now the Austin American Statesman and the Dallas Morning News, right? Did that deal go through? Yeah, good. And it's Stephen Simpson, who covered cannabis for the Texas Tribune. Sure why they clapped at you and not Isaac, but we'll take that for both of you. Karen Brooks, who covered cannabis for the Dallas Morning News and the Texas Tribune before that. And
I just want a big happy family out here.
Exactly. And then on my far left, literally, not necessarily metaphorically, Harvey Kronberg, who is the owner and was the longtime editor of the Quorum Report, which is an online kind of insider. And Harvey's been around the block so long that when he started, they mailed it in snail mail.
And I
still use faxes back then.
And I'm so pleased to moderate this panel because it includes some of my favorite people. So we're going to dive right in because we're running a little bit late and Isaac's going to have to leave early. The regular sessions, it was kind of wild dynamic with what happened with the ban bill. So give us a little bit of the behind the scenes view of what you saw. And I'm going to kind of take this maybe in reverse order. There was a bit of a bait and switch with the teacup bill as it worked its way through the process. Isaac, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I remember waking up on a bright and early Saturday morning, and you were the one that tipped me off to it. But that bill that came out of a Senate committee that had all these changes to it, that a lot of House lawmakers felt they had promised that wouldn't happen. And there was a lot of reaction to it. That was, I think, April or May of the session, right?
May.
And so if you remember, the ban had passed the House. Behind the scenes, those lawmakers were made assurances that they then aired out as grievances about, certain things about teacup would stay in, and they didn't. And that, I think 24 hours or 48 hours later, there was a photo online of, Patrick meeting with some of these lawmakers and coming to some sort of deal. I mean, that's what I was seeing.
Yeah. And Stephen, what are your memories of that kind of switch going on with the ban is flying this way and teacup's flying that way?
Well, I guess to kind of explain, I'm a mental health reporter, so I was kind of like tangentially kind of seeing what was going on. So my understanding was like, from the House was going to get denied. That was like what everyone was saying. It's going to go to the House. It's going to get banned. So once it went through, my emails and phones like exploded from everybody in the industry being like, help, what just happened? And so it was a pretty hectic about 48 hours trying to figure out why the House made this decision. People were trying to call around and figure out what was going on. I think you said about 2 days later, we kind of figured out it had something to do with like the school choice bill.
Yeah. And I kind of realize now I've got them seated in order of seniority in a way. So we're on this side.
Really senior.
Right.
Before cell phones. Fax machines were introduced while I was right.
Karen, you have spent a lot of time over the years on the floor where you have access to members and can really talk to them and see some of the private conversations. What do you remember about as the House had substituted in the King substitute to regulate hemp, but as it hits the floor, things flipped? What kind of conversations did you see on the floor then?
Yeah, there was a lot of consternation about their other bills failing in the Senate if they didn't vote against the regulate hemp bill substitute, right?
And that's what they call hostage shaking around the
bill. Yes, the hostages, yeah. Another thing that was kind of buying off a lot of votes for, and I say that not in the legal sense, but just the vote trades was going on, was the promise that the teacup would pass. And once that came in, there was a lot of people that didn't see the political cover that they would have had in voting to continue legalized hemp if teacup was going to happen. Like they needed to be able to make that differentiation between, recreational hemp and medical marijuana to their conservative voters who still don't always know the difference. So the 1-2 punch of their votes being, or their bills being in jeopardy, and the teacup being promised to them is what finally lost them enough votes to where I think the King Amendment only got like 50 something votes, right? And then the whole hemp ban ended up getting like 90, right? 90 something.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then when the teacup went south because they added this chronic, they added the opioid requirement before, or the or suggestion,
just sort of watered it down from what it had been promised.
Right. So they were gonna. The way the law was written, they would have had to have tried opioids first before they could turn to medical marijuana, and then they also didn't have all the chronic pain and all the conditions that they had originally been posed. So that all went south, and which threw everything into jeopardy. But they managed to get that resolved, I think, on the Saturday night before the session ended, or maybe a week before the session ended. It was a week before the session ended. It was like the 21st.
It was, and it's something close to it. And what I frankly didn't realize until weeks after, that even in the conference committee negotiations, the Senate watered down the teacup bill.
Yeah.
There's a provision that doctors can petition to add orphan conditions to it. And the Senate insisted that, you can petition, but nothing changes until the legislature passes a new law, which is no help whatsoever.
Right. It wasn't the permissive language I saw in one version of the bill that was, or any deemed by the doctor, that did never make the final cut. And I remember there being bills coming out on Thursday and being passed by the committee and then get onto the floor and then going back and being killed. And it was like whiplash covering it. Right, Harvey?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to touch, since we mentioned the word bait and switch and hostage taking, let me take it one step further back. Dan Patrick not only enjoys taking legislative hostages, he enjoys shooting the hostage. This goes back to, in order to get elected speaker, we have a freshman speaker, Dustin Burrows. In order to be elected speaker, he had to promise Democrats that school funding, which was essentially a metaphor for teacher pay raises, would be moving through the process at the same, joined at the hip, essentially, with school vouchers. Well, surprise, surprise, he broke his word. They passed vouchers, and as soon as they passed vouchers without school finance, we wrote that since the hemp ban, or the cannabis ban, was Dan Patrick's marquee bill, he was going to hold teacher pay raises hostage for cannabis ban.
Same as they did in 2023.
Right. And by the end of the session, of course, time is running out. My sense, talking particularly to veteran members, younger members didn't really know about the sellout that the speaker had done on them. But veteran members, one of the roles of the speaker is to protect the House from votes that just gratuitously cut you up. And this was going to be a vote that gratuitously cut you up. Pretty much every Republican constituency was impacted in one form or fashion. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but it broke through. And they were having to face their veterans. They were having to face their Highland Park housewives. They were having to face. It was just a bad vote that nobody wanted to take one way or the other. But the speaker walked them into that trap, and ultimately they ended up passing a ban that nobody wanted to take a vote on in the first place.
Sometimes votes really aren't votes in terms of where members stand. So we should occasionally give them grace for what they do, but hold them accountable in the future. There were also elements during the session of what, I can remember which one of y'all dubbed it, the hemp versus teacup civil war. Stephen, you get credit for that one. Talk to us a little bit about that and how it played out from your point of view.
Well, it turned out, I think, to make a lot of people confused in the very beginning months. There was a lot of back and forth amongst media, I guess, in the media played out. You'd have one story come out from the teacup perspective, another story come out from the hemp perspective. They're both blaming each other for the problems. And I don't think most people realize that the average reader doesn't know the difference between cannabis and hemp. They just know it as like weed. And so you're just going to keep seeing these various conflicting stories about weed coming out every day. It's going to cause a lot of confusion problems. I was getting emails from people being like, I see this as poisoning kids, but hemp is also poisoning kids. What's the difference in the molecules? All these kind of things that are going to take a lot of explaining that you can't really do in a small story on print or paper. And so I think that was one of the things that kind of gave a lot of steam to the ban at the very beginning. And I think, funny enough, farmers really kind of clarified it for me. And they were like, it's a plant. The plan is like it can be turned into two different things, but at the end of the day, it's still the same plan.
It's like gosh, the conversations the reporters get into with people like this one and many of you trying to like pull apart the science and the chemistry and then put it back together in a way that our readers, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And Isaac, how did you see the tension between teacup and hemp playing out in legislative outcomes?
You know, thankfully, when I started covering this shortly before the session, this is my first session. Your article was the first one I read, and you were the first person I talked to. So that helped orient me a lot. You know, just meant kind of a generally disjointed legislative lobbying effort for much of the regular session. Like, there were so many people in our inboxes trying to get us to write stories about different aspects of the industry. And it's really difficult to parse, especially if this is your first time learning about the industry. And, you know, you guys all have these very cool sounding names, all kind of sound the same in the press release. And so it just starts to get jumbled. And it was hard without, you know, people who, you know, having insight from people who really knew the industry inside out to really parse through that.
Oh. And let's talk about the fun part. The ban passes and the lieutenant governor decides to keep having press conferences about it.
Throw a bag of chips.
I'm just
at
going
the
to toss
reporters.
that one out there like I'll go to town about what that was like for those of you who are in the room, and then reporting on it afterwards. And then also the response from the public about it.
Yeah, so the ban had passed and was on its way to the governor the weekend before. And then like the Tuesday or Wednesday, like just a couple of days, it was already on the way to the governor, like literally on the way to the governor. It wasn't waiting for a third reading. It wasn't waiting for any conference committee. It was done. And then Patrick holds a press conference and he is agitated and passionate and very upset at the media for not telling everybody how bad this hemp is. Like, in headlines, as opposed to like letting the people go back and forth, and you know what I'm saying. And so he says, he asks somebody, well, you know, would you eat it? Would you eat this? Not knowing it was in it. And he tosses this bag of chips towards the reporters. And this doesn't hit anybody. It's not like it wasn't an assault. You know, it hits somebody in the foot, lands their feet. It was shocking though, because that is a tiny press conference room. And to watch him wing a bag of chips at somebody 10 feet away, closer than you and I are, it showed this level of agitation. He's prone to theatrics, you know, everybody knows that. He knows that. He always has been. And it definitely did what it was supposed to do, because it got everybody's attention. It went everywhere. The video was viral. We were all in the pictures. And then so after that, I asked him, but I don't know that I was the only one, asked him, well, you know, the bill is passed. Why are you having a press conference demanding that this bill be passed? And then I was like, are you afraid he's going to veto it? Because that's the only reason at that point. Like, who is he talking to? It's the only person left is Abbott. So he got, you know, he didn't answer the question directly. I know his heart. I've talked to him. I'm not going to say but I know his heart. And so that's when we all were like, oh, well, he's going to veto it. And what happens? Exactly a month later.
Can I add a little political context?
Yeah.
Dan Patrick typically is got some of the best political antenna at the Capitol, whether you like him or hate him. He's got some of the, mechanically, he's one of the best politicians out there.
Very good at it.
And this is maybe the first time that he is so far out on a limb away from his MAGA base that he's frankly stunned by it. He typically, among Republican primary voters, will poll about 65% approval. He was down to in the high 30s in terms of approval, which may have had something to do with the veto. And I got to tell you, I think the governor truly enjoyed. The governor has had record high approval ratings ever since he was shipping off undocumented workers or folks to Martha's Vineyard. He's all of a sudden he's at 60% approval, and Dan Patrick's at 35% approval. It's usually the other way around. So there was a certain element of desperation from Patrick's perspective, because he lost the narrative. He lost control of the argument. He may have won legislatively, but the polling was going against him. In fact, they even had to manufacture a poll to persuade the senators that Republican primary voters actually opposed or supported a full cannabis ban. But that was the political context. And suddenly he's totally upside down among his base. And it may be the first time I think I ever saw him upside down with his base.
And I would like add that you guys might have a better relationship with Abbott, but for like me, he's like a mystery. I never really know what the governor's thinking. So Patrick's reaction was like the first time any of us had any idea that Abbott might be vetoing this thing at all. Because like that was any kind of clue. I figured Abbott might just go along, sign everything. So that reaction was so out of nowhere. We were like, this has to be Abbott related.
Just to remind people how out of nowhere it was, like the press release that went out announcing this thing was just like, we're providing refreshments to reporters.
Oh, refreshments, that's right.
I went and I was expecting Trunite, and he lifted, it was theatrical.
So we walk into this long table with a bunch of bumpy stuff covered in a blanket, and it looks like a body. And Steven, Dan Patrick's, press officer, is standing behind it with his hands behind his back wearing his suit. And I think it was John Moritz who's like, when can we see the body? Well, she just dies out laughing. But we're like, okay, this has got to be. But he didn't even say it. He didn't even tell us that the press conference was about THC. Like he just said, legislative update, refreshments provided. And all of us were like, well, what else could it be? Well, the bill is on the way to the governor. It can't be about THC. Yeah.
Because it's surreal, but so entertaining.
The lieutenant governor is not known for his entertaining of reporters.
Yeah.
They even talked about when he walked into the hemp shop and got carded.
Well, and he's, famously, he banned reporters from the Senate floor.
Yeah.
And that's a change in how reporting.
Might have been responsible for that.
Yeah, that might be that guy, that kid who works for you, Scott Braddock. Yeah.
Please. He would have banned us anyway. But Scott can take credit for that if he wants.
Well, he was the first bandit. The lieutenant governor called me and told me I had to fire him, and I may be one of the first people to tell him no.
We never went back after the pandemic. It was the issue. The House let us back on the floor after the pandemic. He never did.
The Senate never did. One thing I, as a lobbyist, did not see coming in May, as I'm panicking because it was clear to me the ban bill was going to move, and I'm desperately doom scrolling on Twitter every night, was right-wing talk radio unleashing on Patrick. Did any of y'all see that coming? And how did it play? And did you even see it in your revision? Because during session, when you're reporting, maybe you don't have time to doom scroll.
I'll let y'all take this one. I'm not of the age that listens to talk radio.
Any other issue would have surprised me.
Yeah, any other
issue. Any other issue. Like the THC thing, the hemp thing and the THC thing was fascinating to me for that exact reason, because there really isn't any, once you get past the moral, evangelical, no substances of any kind, not even cigarettes, not even caffeine types, there's no political.
It's bipartisan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It did reach every demographic, frankly. And AM radio, which is kind of still the town hall of Republican voters, whether it was West Texas or the North Texas into the Dallas market, or actually even Houston, they were all railing against the lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor, by the way, in case you didn't know, was a talk radio host himself for a decade before he ever got into running for office.
And I would say that I think the lieutenant governor got kind of surprised by how much people haven't accepted marijuana at this point. Like it's become a common acceptance. And so when he kept calling it like dope or reefer or things like that, Perry kept doing that too. They're like very old terms. I think they kind of viewed it as like, this is some young person thing that people in college are still smoking all this. So I don't think they realize there's a bunch of older people that listen to talk radio that are very concerned about what's happening to their medicine or their patches or things like that, who are actually going to be really involved in this.
Trying to sell reefer madness as the paradigm for anybody that consumes cannabis fell upon deaf ears, let's say it wrong.
It seemed particularly among the press corps. That conference.
I don't know what I want to know you're suggesting.
I'm not suggesting that. Just more that y'all are out in the world, perhaps more than our leadership. And I had experience, which I shared on Quorum Report Radio, which Braddock has now launched, of being in a bank with my 83-year-old mother in a very conservative town. And one of the bank secretaries asked me what I did. So I told her, and then she starts out loud asking me, well, what brands do you like and what dosage? And I'm looking around like, you're going to get fired, ma'am. And I, had the conversation with her, and I walked out of there thinking the cultural moment has moved so far ahead of Dan Patrick. he cannot see the dust on the horizon. And in retrospect, I think that's a lot of what happened with him, much to my continual amusement. All right, the veto, that dramatic moment. And Harvey, you already mentioned the polling effect. I have a quick follow-up question for you about that. Those numbers you were throwing around, those were Republican primary numbers only, right?
Exactly.
And those are the numbers that count in our political.
So far in Texas, until reality on the ground changes, the only election that matters is the primary, and particularly the Republican primary. And just to give you some context, we're a state of 31 million people. Typically in a Republican primary, it's anywhere from 1.5 to 3 million voters. So parse that. It's either 750,000 to 1,200,000 voters essentially control the policy and the direction of Texas government. It's totally disconnected from the broader population. But in this case, it was really crucial because if you had told me in January that cannabis was going to divide MAGA, I knew about guns, I knew about gays, I just didn't know about cannabis.
Isaac, how did you see the veto playing out, and with polls and public interest and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, we all knew this was something that was connecting with a lot of people, even just through our readership and our numbers and that kind of thing. I do want to point out, though, we found after, when you just, after the dust settled, after the veto, when his campaign filings came out, you saw there were some pretty hefty checks in there from members of the industry, all different corners of it. And ultimately, if I've learned one thing about the governor during this one session, is that the money does talk. Like, I'm not here to insinuate it's kind of quid pro quo necessarily, but that $100 million war chest didn't come from nowhere, and he knows where the stuff comes from. And I think that, like, coupled with obviously the public pressure and the public opinion, I think it's important to remember how far money does go in this town.
I do want to make a point to add to that. At the time he was making his decision, it's time he was the week before the veto deadline was up, I should say that. I did a story about this and talked to a bunch of smart people about it. And from our observations of Abbott over the years, and of that, this was really one of the few issues that we hadn't heard from him on. It's hard to, there are a lot of issues where you can cleanly track the money, like school vouchers, $10 million from Jeff Yass, that kind of stuff. But, it's not like, there's obvious big money coming for, on the cannabis issue. There's smaller donors, there's business, there's councils here and there. But Abbott, so really when we were trying to figure out what Abbott would do, it was a very unique, in fact, one of the few over the course of his governor's term, really, where we hadn't heard from him on it. And we couldn't nail him down on where he stood on property taxes like we did, but we knew that he wanted to cut them, right? We didn't know what he wanted to do with THC. All we knew was that what he hadn't said, what he hadn't stopped, and so everybody was, while his actions were signaling that he was going to veto it because he just kept not signing it or kept, we didn't. This was a decision that he was kind of able to make independently because he's pretty much going to be governor for as long as he wants to, first of all. He's not going to lose the governorship on a THC issue. I don't care where he goes on it, And so we had a unique opportunity to watch him make that decision and figure out where in his personal politics that was. And you can't say that about most of the issues that he deals with. And there were, Bill Miller is one of the longtime lobbyists and consultants and all over the place. And that was one of his observations too, but he certainly wasn't the only one, And I think that when he stays silent on issues, you kind of start to figure out where he's going. But this one, it was hard to tell because there were so many nuances,
Kind of piggyback on that a little bit, but like you said, we don't really know where Abbott stands on a lot of these kind of issues, but he's been pretty progressive these past couple of years with pretty much drug usage in Texas. He's passed the Ibogaine bill the last session. That's pretty much a pretty drastic move. And I think current data shows that most psychedelic usage is occurring in Texas. There's a lot of psychedelic rules and regulations that have been lifted here kind of quietly over the past couple of years. So I guess we don't fully know what Abbott is thinking, but he seems to be pretty progressive on the issue.
Well, I think the Ibogaine thing speaks to veterans in a way that even THC, another level.
That was the smoothest lobbying job I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
They had just as a side note, I winged an invite to a documentary screening that Rick Perry hosted.
Yeah, I was invited to that
We
too.
got a dozen extremely conservative members were there. Great movie. I'm sobbing behind Mike Schofield before it's all over. And I walked out of there thinking that bill's going to pass because they had the effect of change on veterans in such beautifully edited fashion.
Let me add one more little piece.
And they're not catching school, like kids with it, according to them. So
Right.
they don't have that. They don't have that villain. that
Like
they-
psilocybin, ibogaine is not indigenous to Texas.
I want to go back. Every now and then you think Texas politics is governed by policy. No, it's personality. And it's important to remember that Dan Patrick has been lieutenant governor as long as Greg Abbott has been governor. And for that entire time, Greg Abbott has been looking over his shoulder because Patrick has the ear of the right. And there's always been suspicion of Greg Abbott that he's really a moderate in disguise. So much so that Greg Abbott has not been to on the floor of a state Republican convention since 2016. Dan Patrick speaks at a state Republican convention, and it's a half-hour standing ovation with people in their hands up. I don't know what the difference in religion between having your hands up like this is, but that kind of characterizes a Dan Patrick speech. For him to put Patrick on defense, I've known Abbott since he was a Supreme Court justice, long time. This was a really delicious moment for it. So as one friend of mine, and one of my mentors is fond of saying, when everything else fails in politics, just remember, deep down, they're shallow.
And for you, the beat press among you, I was about to say beat cops, but that would be a definite misstatement. I mean, what about the role of educating the public? I mean, this is a complicated topic, and a couple of y'all did stories just so we're explainers of what is it we're talking about? What is THC? What does it show up in? What were your experiences writing stories like that?
I think that was like probably my number 1 or number 2 read story. We posted like probably end December, early January. As soon as we knew that this was going to be a big ledge issue, was just literally a glossary, breaking it down easy terms, and it took talking to people for me to understand that. But yeah, I mean, that's how we navigated.
And that was your number 1 or 2 read story in terms
I
of
think so.
reader response?
People kept going back to it. You have to remember, like, so many people don't, when I talk to my friends about what the work I'm doing, they're like, I didn't know any kind of weed was legal in Texas whatsoever. And so if you were reading a story and you were like, I'm confused about this term, you were then linked to a glossary.
Right. You just write 5 things to know, and you don't ever have to explain it again.
Exactly.
You just link to it. It's not that easy,
I would say
but that's what we do.
we had a little bit of advantage. I was one of 3 people that were covering the THC issue, so we were able to kind of approach it from various different angles.
The Texas.
Yeah, there were nice people over there. But I think that really helped to kind of allow a couple of us to really focus on what's the difference between hemp and cannabis and just kind of break it down, which is also one of our more read stories, and also helped me and a lot of other people in the newsroom know the difference, because in my own mind, I didn't really know the difference between like Delta 8, Delta 9, THCA. I just look into the smoke shop and they all look the same to me. So having that kind of information, I think, was really helpful for us, the newsroom, and also the readership, because a lot of people are just trying to figure out what was going on. Why do people care about this band so much? And reading that, I think, really helped people like, oh, this is medicine for a lot of people. These are patches, things like that. It's not just joints.
Yeah, exactly. And how about you, Karen? What kind of reader reaction did you get to your stories?
Oh my gosh. I started covering the, sometimes I don't think I even need this thing. I started covering the THC thing, I guess, in 2021.
That's all right.
For the Texas Tribune. And so I ended up covering it pretty solidly when I moved over to the Morning News in 2024. And so one of the things I noticed when the session started going in and the ban started being a thing, is that there was very few situations where I could go out into the world for any length of time and not hear about it from somebody. And this is before they would know that I was a reporter. Like, when someone, when you tell somebody I'm a reporter, I covered, the Capitol, and they're like, "Oh, have you been seeing about the hemp ban?" But which is weird enough because most of the time people don't even know what to ask me when I tell them what I do for a living. They're like, "Oh, okay, can I take your order?" But the Uber drivers and the shop managers and my 60-year-old mother-in-law and her buddy across the street, I was asked 3 times, and I did it all 3 times, to give updates on the Fan in DFW radio station, the sports station, to do a Q&A on the air during their live, 4-hour evening talk show about what it is, because their fans wanted to know about it. These are people. One of the people in the studio wasn't 100% sure what the governor's name was.
Yeah.
So they were not, which is fine. No charge.
Not a politically engaged crowd.
That's my point, right? But everybody wanted to know about it. It was absolutely, in my 30 years in Texas journalism, most of which is politics, I've never seen this level of cross-section, broad interest as I did. And these were people coming to me. This wasn't me asking people, what do you think?
This was coming from out of state stuff too. People I had to get calls from people from New Mexico, Oklahoma, what are y'all guys doing? Just it seemed like everyone was really clued in on this particular issue in Texas for some reason. I think it just caught everyone's attention. People are still trying to ban this substance. I think even Fox News wrote a couple of articles talking about Patrick trying to ban this.
We're basically surrounded by legal states.
Yeah, or these industry people calling you from other states, or just people who are, again, perplexed at what the hell is Texas doing?
It was a mixture of both. We had people from Oklahoma being like, yes. And then we had people just from other states being like, I have a cousin that lives there and they take the substance. Are they going to be okay? Are they going to get arrested? Are they going to be, should they move, kind of stuff? Some people were
medical resource. All right, and I know you guys get endless emails and press releases. You have any advice for people who are pitching stories to you? And I imagine you got a lot on this one too, because we had business owners who were facing an existential crisis with their business.
Yeah, there's a lot of pitches. I'd say that at the beginning, there was a lot of how do I say this? Tit for tat pitches. It was you would write a story and then someone would be like, good story and all, but I have something else to say, or you didn't get all the things. Let me tell you this kind of stuff. And it kind of really cluttered up trying to tell the story because everyone was trying to one up each other. But I feel as the session kind of went on and people started to realize this is about to really happen, everyone kind of narrowed in all right, here's what we need. It became more of a unified voice.
How about you, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, in my experience, I don't think that there was any more kind of activity or pitching on this issue than there are on some of the biggest issues. But the fact that this was the biggest issue that filled up our inboxes, that was noteworthy, right? And I absolutely love getting sources coming to me. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings, and it's completely defensible, absolutely valid, because people generally don't know how we operate, but is that we can continue to write stories about the same issue every day with no news peg. Okay. Well, we're not a science, we're not science journals, obviously. We do have science reporters. We have health and human services reporters. But especially those of us covering the policy are covering all different kinds of policies. I was writing about THC one day. I was also in charge of covering the state budget. And so, while I would have loved to write daily, explainers and go dig deep, I really wanted to go dig deep into the science. I really wanted to do a big weekend reader on, what is the difference and who, where is all the research? But, as a Dallas Morning News legislative reporter, that's not really my job. That's outside my wheelhouse in terms of the resources we have. We don't have a ton of reporters covering each subject. We have one reporter covering a ton of subjects in most cases, right? I look over at him. We had Stephen over here at the Tribune. Even there, so to break into, to break through the noise and give me a reason, because I want a reason to write about it. But if nothing happened that day, then I can't write about it in that context, right? I have to come up with a reason. So then, if there's not a headline changing here, today happened this, what I need is, some real people, as we call them, civilians, non-journalists, non-bureaucrats, non-advocates. Susan is not a real person, as much as I love her. Personal stories. Sometimes the groups, the professional groups, like called storytellers. People that are willing to like get out there and say, oh, I use CBD for this and I use that. There needs to be some kind of conflict, which there was plenty in this, but a specific kind of head to head, a clash, some kind of something that's got everybody stalemated, and there needs to be forward motion, on. So when we talk about a news peg, that means it needs to be timely. Something needs to be have a hook to it. Something's happening today or it's happening next week. The THC legislation gave us all kinds of opportunities, but then when you went like 2 months with no hearings and no bill moving, as much as I would have liked to have written, and I hope I'm not coming off as like lecturing you guys.
No.
Please keep the ideas coming. Just don't take personally. This is why we say no.
Just don't ever think we can tell you what to write.
Unless we have the opportunity to do like big, hard-hitting investigative things, which we don't normally do during the session, at least we don't in the Austin bureaus, we have to like follow the news cycle. And so the best way to get our attention is if you're calling me with a story idea, find me a couple of people in Dallas, Fort Worth area, who are business owners, who are consumers, who have been in jail, real people sources in my area. You want, Steven's statewide. So that's, whatever. And then, Harvey's got different things, but that's, that's my advice on the pitches is kind of, that's what we're looking for.
I've three mechanical things. One is conflict drives the story. No conflict, no story. Second, this is really mechanical. I saw a lot of press releases coming through from people who didn't have communications persons or public relations firms. Be sure the subject line, if the subject line doesn't grab us, the odds are the press release isn't going to get written or read, or the communication's not going to get read. And third, make sure your lead is in the first paragraph. We all have limited amounts of time. It's just pure mechanics, but people get so enthusiastic on either side of an issue, they kind of forget that, I don't know about you guys, I get about 200 emails a day during a legislative session. You've got my attention for a few seconds.
I was going to just say to kind of build off a little bit of that. I think I got a lot of emails asking like why we didn't like go into like the formulas and the chemicals and stuff like that on Delta 8 and all these kind of things. I would say most people just don't find it interesting. It's going to be really not, it's going to like an Easter egg thing. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the point. We kind of educate people. So sometimes we have to make a distinction between, is this going to be a story or if this is going to be like a science?
Right. You don't want to add to the confusion.
Yeah.
You don't want to just lump everything in one group because clearly that's false. It's inaccurate. You want to be as precise and accurate as you can without like glazing people's eyes over. Because the truth is, this is the God's honest truth. Most of the readers won't get past the first 200 words of our story anyway. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, 100%. There's research behind it. This has not changed. It's never changed. Okay. Well, you might have remembered what I was saying. I'm sorry.
Back when print was actually on paper.
Right. I was there for that. But so we do walk a very fine line. We do have space limits in the publication. We do, despite of it seems intuitive, also have limits online. Because most readers don't read past the first 200 words unless they're damn good words, and that conflict is really good. Or the person's story is really good. So we do want to get into the formulas and we do want to make sure that we educate people while also bringing them through the story and not letting them, start making them think that they're reading some kind of a CDC report. So it is a challenge. I don't want you guys to think that we don't throw it in there because it's just kind of hard to understand. I mean, we are in a kind of a difficult position, just like I know a lot of you are, in trying to convey the information while also just not losing them.
Yeah, and in a short amount of space.
And in not as many words as we would like to have. Yeah.
Given we had the lieutenant governor surrounded by law enforcement threatening people, did y'all ever have trouble getting real people to talk to?
far as consumers was harder. I noticed that the businesses were a little bit nervous about it at first, but for the most part, they were, they're sitting out there with their signs and their advertisements, so they'll talk to us, but it is a little bit harder to find people if they don't come to you, because it's not like you can go out there on the street and say, hi to you, consumer, and you don't want to go into the stores and start bugging the customers.
Yeah.
So it is. So you go to social media, but most of us know people who either smoke the weed, the illicit kind, or they go into the hemp stores regularly, or they do a little bit of both. And you end up going through your networks for that. But it is, because it's a gray area legally in some cases, it can be difficult.
I'd say this is where a lot of you guys kind of came in. Was I just kind of reached out to some of the industry leaders and be like, do you guys have anyone that personally knows like going through this or has this kind of help? And that really, having that personal connection with like the actual people that y'all work with is like some of the greatest things that we as reporters can get from you guys, because most people just see the media pop up and be like, you want to say a story? They're going to be like, no. But I think most people are kind of intimidated by journalists at first. And so having you guys be kind of that bridge really does help us in a lot of ways.
Let's jump back to the chronology of last year. The special sessions, as the called session started, first called session, it was supposed to be the THC session, but then it didn't really play out that way.
All right, you're going to have to remind me.
All right. So
First session
was THC was the headline issue, and then it started raining in Kerr County.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it didn't even pass and didn't even get over to the House, right? It passed the Senate, but it never got a hearing in the House.
And now I'm trying to remember the first call if it even got out.
It passed the Senate the first session, and then the House had one hearing, and then the flood happened, and so we never got back to it.
So the House, so we tried again, the second special session, and the House still didn't call a vote on it.
Still didn't call a vote, but then Briscoe Cain drops a very large bill that's a modification of the Ken Keene committee substitute.
Yeah, the regulate hemp bill that looked a lot like what the governor had said his.
And I kept popping into, the bill was then in public health. Right. State affairs had too much on its plate with the emergency response issues. And I kept popping into Gary Vandiver's office, who was the chair of public health, who unfortunately is not coming back. And they just kept saying, we don't know. Maybe, I don't know if I'm hearing or not. We don't know.
I'm going to pivot off that just briefly. What was noteworthy about the governor's veto, typically a governor's veto is 3 paragraphs. And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But this was a 5-page veto. I've been doing this since 1989. I've never seen more than a 2-page veto. It was his prescription. I mean, he essentially wrote the bill that he wanted to sign.
Yeah.
In that veto message.
Almost an 11:45 p.m. manifesto. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Raise your hand if you were hitting refresh on Sunday from like 6 p.m. until midnight. Yeah, see? There were some of you out there, Yeah, that's where we were at on Sunday night, was hitting refresh, waiting for, waiting for that veto to come through, and it was 11:45. I had already written the story. I already knew we was doing. I'm sure you did. Or whoever y'all had. Most of us.
I was actually at
that point. By that point, we knew that he was gonna veto it. There was no way he was gonna let it just kind of trickle into law, as controversial as it was. So yeah. So let's talk about that for a sec. Not the veto night itself, but what you were just referring to in the special sessions. At some point, there was there were the redistricting sessions, right? And so for our part, Dallas Morning News had, there was 3 reporters in Austin that the Dallas Morning News had, and at that time we weren't hooked up with Hearst yet, so we didn't have the luxury of being able to do content sharing. So we had one reporter in Chicago with the Democrats, and we had one reporter, on vacation sometimes. That wasn't me. It was one of the other, they'd already booked the vacations, and then you had, me and, trading off with, trying to cover everything else that was going on in the special. And the THC thing, and this is just kind of for y'all to keep in mind, those of you who interact with reporters this way, at some point the THC bill fell to the back burner.
Yeah.
Because we knew that passing a ban again was just going to get vetoed again, and we knew for that reason that the House probably wasn't going to take another vote on that, and we knew that a regulation bill wouldn't pass the Senate. Yeah. So So THC went from top priority early in the summer to near the bottom during the special.
Because the members didn't want to spend the time, the energy, the vote on something where there was no consensus between the two houses.
And if you have the luxury of lots of reporters to cover everything and lots of space and lots of time and lots of editors to edit all that stuff, then you do want to dive into, well, what does it mean? Why are they even doing this? But at some point, if you have to dash out stories like another THC, it just confuses people, like the readers. They're like, well, I thought it was vetoed. Why are they bringing it back? Theatrics, that's why. So at some point, you have to come back, and make the news judgment from our perspective that it's not an advocating or for or against the particular bill. It's just, is anything really going to change realistically, given what we know about the process, given the authority we have, the knowledge that we have? Is it even something people need to worry about beyond those who are counting votes during the primary season?
Well, post sessions and post executive order, and even actually throughout the whole year, there have been some raids around the state. Definitely in your jurisdiction, certainly in Houston and some other areas. And what's y'all's take on how those raids are playing out in the media? Karen, I can't remember if you wrote about them any.
I wrote about them some because we had a reporter up in the suburbs, like in the Allen, Frisco, Denton area, where a lot of those raids were happening, kind of a ground zero for a lot of that. And for a while there, we were covering them like chapter and verse. We were following the Allen police chief around everywhere. He showed up at all. Yeah, I think it was a year that said we thought somebody thought he was gonna run for state rep. He was around the Capitol so often.
Right. Wasn't me.
He was always with Dan Patrick. Yeah. And so, we were following him around a lot, kind of watching what he was going to do because it was a local story. But that person left and we've got a new one in, and she's going to be trying to learn the issue up there. But it's hard to keep up with them. It was hard to keep up with the raids. It was hard to keep up with we have not done a good job at all, in my opinion, of following up on how those, because I'm starting to hear that the charges have been dropped. Money's been gotten back to these things. We were all about writing about them when they got taken in with a healthy amount, of like, kind of balancing information, to the demonizing that prosecutors and cops like to do when they make arrests like that. But we haven't followed up on any of this stuff that I'm aware of, as well as we could have. Certainly, I haven't written about them being released from jail.
When the cases peter out, nobody knows.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. We don't get those press releases. We get pictures of like drug stacks and money stacks whenever the arrests come in, but we rely on the lawyers, to tell us when those changes, and then we don't get to talk to, the people at the cops shop don't want to talk to us. And then there's all of a sudden it's like the walls come down and the gates come down and we do the stories anyway, but we absolutely need to be doing a better job of covering the other half of it, because that's where you start to really get to the truth of what's going on.
Can they make a case?
They can't make a case. They're giving you all that money back that they said was drug money. They gave you all those gummies back or whatever they do. They said were not, all that inventory back that they said was illegal.
Yeah, I think my favorite moment during the special session hearings, Chief Nye was testifying about this stuff is all illegal and implying that money's going to the Middle East and blah, 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 blah. And Karina Pearson, not a liberal, from Rockwall County, looked at him and said, if it's illegal, why haven't you arrested anybody? And he just kind of went, bah, 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 bah. And that was it.
That was before he called all the hemp stores terrorist organization.
Yes, exactly. That's always
obviously
Chief Nye. See, this is why we follow him around.
Obviously, hemp shops cannabis shops are promoting Sharia law.
Exactly.
We'll be the dude.
Okay, see, that's a story. If you guys can remember something like that.
All right, here we are a few less than 6 weeks from the primary, and there is a special election in a Senate seat in Fort Worth today. How do you guys see cannabis playing out in the election cycle, if at all? You think people are talking about it out there?
I don't think so.
After the veto, it was
it's just a dead issue.
Yeah,
I think it helps Abbott a lot. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the House members came out like pretty soon afterwards and being like, this wasn't my idea.
Yeah.
They all backed away from it pretty quickly. So I don't know if it's going to have like that much of an impact on it, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think they want to talk about it. I don't think they want anybody to remember it.
And it's moved to the regulatory agenda as opposed to legislative agenda. So there's, and you know, the comptroller, I guess, could talk. That's a race that they might talk about it, but haven't seen it. No, it's all Sharia law right now.
All right.
Yeah.
Any questions about Sharia law or anything else? I'll let Heather come steal my microphone so she can.
Heather, we're the ones asking you the questions.
Did you notice that at the very beginning it was about THC and the kid ate a 500 milligram gummy and died? That's kind of, to me, and that's how we saw it from out in the West Texas area. All right. And it wasn't shortly after that when they couldn't back that one up. All right. Then it came and changed. And all of a sudden these people, because I watched online, I don't know why, but I watched online and it flipped from THC to THC psychosis.
Yeah.
And it went to psychosis. Now, the psychosis was now going to make this kid who was stable crazy and go do something. And that, to me, was where they brought people in. And as soon as they could find doctors that would testify to that, they brought them in. You'd see 15 people say, hey, look, we want it all legal. We don't think anything's right. And then the next person would be this doctor saying, well, I just got here. I'm glad y'all waited on me. And, yeah, we've got clients that now they do the THC and they go psychotic and they, explode. So, I mean, does anybody have a reason to know why in the middle of all that they changed from this THC to THC psychosis and now that's the bad dog?
I would say that's a national talking point right now. That's been kind of going around for about a year or 2 years, sort of this psychosis. And another one is, forget what it's
the modern day reefer madness.
Yeah, like when you smoke too much weed and you start throwing up or something. Yeah, that's another one that's been kind of going around. It seems to, is that what it is?
Yeah, strawberry.
Yeah. So I think it's just like they picked up what was going around nationally. I know there's a group out of Colorado that kind of was one of the ones kind of pushing it a lot. Yes. Then I think that's sort of where that talking point came from.
Yeah, they do. The talking points come from all over, all over the country. And that's where they match the cannabis advocates on, is bringing in people who have experienced their children or they're, having some kind of psychotic, event or break, whether it's caused by THC or not. I'm not seeing any proof of that. Obviously there's all kinds of science that, that you guys are aware of that I'm not, I don't need to spout to you, but, they, and you don't, as a reporter, want to have somebody lying to you and let them lie in your story. But I'm also not in a position to tell this mom that she's lying.
Yeah.
Because she lost her kid and because she believes, and someone's been telling her, that this is what caused it. I don't think these, it's a very difficult when that starts coming. But if you're talking about the terms, the scare tactics, the frightening, it didn't originate here. Yeah, that's a plan. That's a national plan. You see it in all kinds of issues. You see the same language in vouchers, see the same language in abortion rights. You'll start seeing the same phrases trickling on down. And suddenly we've heard it so much in the media that sometimes, we have to keep ourselves from using it. And we do, we try.
And I will say that you could pretty much find a study to confirm any of your ideas out there in the world. Someone's written a study about something that's going to have some kind of confirmation of what you're looking for.
Most of the scare tactics ultimately, or the scare language, was ultimately reinforcing the argument for regulation, not prohibition.
Right.
Next, one more question, McNair.
So I have a question about the readership for the Quorum Report. I didn't know much about the Quorum Report until Susan told me. I was in it. I was the mom who broke down emotionally with Charles Perry in the Senate hearing for the ban. And I do have an idea for a pitch, but my goal would be, to reach regulators. So is the readership include regulators? Is it year round and all of that? If you could let us know more about the
Quorum Report is not really a mainstream publication. We write mostly for political professionals. So they may posture as Democrats or Republicans, right wing or left wing, but largely they vote for the church. They belong to the church of what works, which is kind of another definition of politics. Yes, we have most of the legislature, most of the state agencies, most of the lobby, and then depending on whatever the issues are du jour, we'll see a spike in that particular group of subscribers. And we don't do advertising or underwriters. It's all subscription based. Our attitude is if we don't deliver value to the policymakers, they're not going to pay. And so far, so good. Been around since 1983. I've only been around since 89.
All right, Heather's cut us off. So thank all of y'all for coming, and I'll thank Isaac later.